Hey everyone in the VC, it's Matt. I hope everyone's having a Merry Christmas. Hope you have a lot of family time, a lot of fun, a lot of good food, and got some of the presents that you wanted, and all that good stuff. So, best wishes to everyone out there. I wanted to do a video. It's been a while since the last one, and so got an idea. Me and Mr. Mayo Joe the other day did a video ranking an album. He did Elvis's Christmas album, ranking the songs from his least to his most favorite on that record. And I suggested, him being a big Beatle fan, that maybe he should do the tracks on the Beatles Christmas album in order of preference. He said, suggested that I do it. So I thought, why not? So anyway, my copy of the Beatles Christmas album, obviously this is a counterfeit copy, and I wish I had the real one, but maybe someday. And unfortunately, I don't have any of the 45s, the flexi discs. I just have the bootleg copy here. So, but it does come in a heavy stock cardboard inner sleeve and a second sleeve, which is what do you call it, plastic lined, and it's on festive holiday green vinyl, which the true copy is just on regular black vinyl, though I'd still rather have a true copy one of these days. But yeah, so I don't know that I'll really rank they're not really songs, the tracks on here so much as just talk about the album a little bit. But before that, I suggest, if you're interested, you might want to watch two videos that went up in the last day or two. Beatles Vinyl 85 and Andy Hall both did videos on their Beatle Christmas record collections, and they do have, both of them do have genuine copies of the Christmas album, and they have most, or I think Beatle Vinyl 85 has all of the Fan Club 45s, and Andy Hall has all but the first one, so it's pretty neat to see. And Beatle Vinyl has the British version of the Christmas album, which is the same content, but it's just a different cover, so it's kind of cool. I had never seen a real one of those. I've seen pictures of them in books and so forth, but I've never seen an actual one, so that was kind of neat to see the front and the back and the label and all that. And I believe those are even harder to find than the American ones. They're both pretty costly if you can find a real one. But anyway, so for me, it's just it's really not Christmas until I hear these goofy tracks or songs from the Beatles. It's just an integral part of Christmas for me. And there's certain other Christmas songs that I always have to hear every year, but the Beatles Christmas album is certainly one of them, and one of my favorite Christmas records. It goes without saying. So I had long ago, when I got into the Beatles, when I was like 8 or 9, back in 1973, I had no idea about this. For those of you that don't know, and I imagine that everyone that's tuning into this video probably knows, that the Beatles from 1963 through 1969, through their fan club, sent out a Christmas 45. Is actually a little flexi disc every Christmas to the fan club members only, and so they were pretty they weren't very durable, so a lot of them, there weren't that many of them to begin with. I don't think they printed a whole bunch of them, but most of them have probably been thrown away or worn out over the years. So if you can find them, they're pretty rare and pretty expensive. And the Beatles broke up, and in I believe not 1970, I believe it was 1971 actually. The fan club knew that the band was broken up, so they put all those Christmas messages on the Beatles Christmas album, which again was never commercially released or publicly released. It was only sent out to members of the fan club, so that's why there's not that many of those floating around, the genuine ones, and why it's been bootlegged and so forth so much through the years. Anyway, around about 1975 or so, a book comes out called All Together Now by Harry Castleman and Walter Podrazek, I believe are the authors' names. And I have the book. I should have looked it up. I should have got it for the video, but I didn't. Anyway, so walk into the bookstore, the shopping mall one day, and see this book, and that's always exciting news when a new Beatle book came out, because there weren't tons of them around like there are now back then, and you didn't know they were coming because you didn't have internet and all that stuff to announce that a new Beatle book was coming out. So it just sort of caught you by happy surprise when you'd walk in and there'd be a book about the Beatles every once in a while. And so, being as I was like 11 or 12, I had to either save up allowance money or beg my parents for money or whatever, and I got the book, a week or two later, and I'm flipping through the book, and the book is a discography of all the Beatle records in America and England up to that point through, I think it goes, book came out 75, I believe, I think it goes through like 1974, and I'm flipping through the book, and I run across a page, and there's this, um, the real ones are a blue cover, not a green cover, by the way. I've also seen red covers, I believe, are on red vinyl. But anyway, so I'm flipping through the book, and there's this picture of this thing, the Beatles Christmas album, and I'm like, wait a minute, because I had been into the Beatles for big time into the Beatles and buying their records and stuff for a couple of years at that point, and the American records were what we could get over here, and had not all their records, and didn't even have all their records yet, but I had quite a few of them. But I'd record stores and looking through them, I said, I'd never heard of that or seen that. What is that? And I had no idea. It had the track listing, which was just, I think it's just that, the dates, or it might have had the first Beatles Christmas record, second Beatles Christmas record. I don't remember how they listed it out. And I had no idea what it was and never heard of it. And I was thinking, well, I know a bunch of people do Christmas albums, and I don't know, was that the Beatles singing Silent Night and Frosty the Snowman or something, or I had no idea. So then, don't know, maybe a year or so later, I found this record store in Dallas, got my dad to take me out there, and walked in there and was just amazed to when I realized that this place sold bootlegs. And because before that I had heard about them, had no idea where to get them. I had this sort of goofy idea, because I was a little kid, that they were impossible to get, or if you got them, it was like some shady guy in a back alley in downtown New York, and trench coat, and hey, you want to buy a Rolex and some bootleg records or something. And so to run across these are actually them kind of didn't even hit me at first what I was looking at. But they sold bootlegs at this store, and so I got a couple of records. It was like a live in, I think, the Tokyo Live, and they had the Beatles Christmas album, which was at that time. This I got this later, and I don't still have that one. I wish I still had it, but it was just one of those plain white cover album jackets with a piece of paper, 8x10 piece of paper. I think it was orange, that was glued onto the jacket that said the Beatles Christmas messages or the Beatles Christmas records. So I grabbed that up, and at that point I still hadn't heard any of this, and took it home and quickly found out that it was not the Beatles doing traditional Christmas songs like Rudolph or whatever. It was them just cutting up and having fun and acting goofy and sending Christmas cheer out. And oddly enough, right around that time or somewhere around there, they started playing these things on the radio every Christmas. And ever since then, they've always sort of played those on the radio. I guess, I don't know if they did before and I just didn't notice, or I don't know if back in the 60s when these came out, if they got any radio play or not. Maybe they did. I was too little to have paid attention. And, I don't really even know how many people in America, I'm sure, because the Beatles were huge, people belonged to the fan club and all, but I mean, a bunch of people didn't, and so I'm not even sure. A lot of people, that even people in the Beatles in the 60s, may not have even known that these fan club records existed. Or maybe they did, I don't know. Anyway, so it's become since then, since say 75, 76 or so, it's become just one of those things that I always have to hear every Christmas, and it's fun and goofy, and so there you go. Anyway, so like I said, there's 7 tracks, the 63 through 69, and the ones I tend to like the best, and I like them all, I guess, but there's really the last 2 are the ones that I would say I would put at the least, and then the others somewhere in the best. But I like the early ones the best, and up through 67. I really like the 1963 one because it's they were just famous, really, or not maybe for a year or so, if even that. They're more sort of still in awe a little bit of what's happening to them. They're a little more, I don't know, down to earth. They're always kind of down to earth, but a little more down to earth, a little more personable on the first ones. The hello, this is John speaking with his voice. Always, that's a classic. I always love that line. Their take on Good King Wenceslas, and but they're talking about the Royal Variety Show. They're talking about this time last year, Love Me Do was in the top 20. Looking all the way back to 10, 12 months ago, and still just a little young, and it's all fresh and new to them as it is to the people that were around that were Beatle fans at the time, I'm sure. So the '63 one, that's a really good one, and I love the when Ringo, and they even mentioned Ringo just started playing drums in '62, and you think this is '63, so that was just several months earlier. It's just kind of neat to catch them at the very beginning there. One thing before I forget, and I've showed this before, but this is a book that's worth looking up if you can find it. I don't know if it's still in print, but this is all about the Beatles Christmas records. It's all about the Christmas shows they did in, I believe, '63, '64, and '65, and then their Christmas solo songs and so forth and so on. It's a fun little book. But the idea, and I should have looked it up in the book because I haven't read this in a few years, but someone suggested the idea to Brian Epstein that they had the Beatles fan club that started in, I don't know, '62 or '63, and sort of thinking, what can we do for Christmas for the fan club kids? Can we send out a postcard or what? Somebody brought up the idea of, why don't they do a little Christmas record? Brian Epstein thought it was silly and dismissed it and said no, but somehow the Beatles got wind of it and they thought it was a brilliant, fun idea, and they wanted to do it. Seeing as how they wanted to do it, Epstein couldn't really say no, so that's kind of how that happened. And it always think about, I don't know of anybody else that, everybody's done Christmas records pretty much, or an album, Christmas album, or a Christmas single, or some such, but I can't really think of, with one exception, any other group or person that did a Christmas record every year or did something for their fan club every year like that, except for the Beatles. REM did it. They had a fan club, and they did it for, I don't know how long, but from the '80s up through whenever they broke up I don't remember when they broke up. It was the early mid 2000s or whatever, whenever that was. But they did a fan club Christmas record every year too, which are kind of fun and all. They're not as good as the Beatles, but they're kind of neat. But yeah, I mean, it always kind of surprised me because I mean, I couldn't really see some bands doing it, but there's other bands that seems like some of the other bands would have picked up on it and they never did, so that kind of surprised me. But anyway, the 1963 record is fun. It's a lot of them talking and goofing off and thinking they're fans and their fan club, people that run their fan club. Ringo sings, and there's a great line when he's done where George says, "Thank you, Ringo, we'll phone you," sort of. So that's a good one. The '64 is kind of more of the same. They're still '63, of course, they were huge in England and not really known in America yet. '64, they broke in America, and so they have like another dose of all new type of fame. So they're still a little bit, um, you know, trying to comprehend what's going on here, and just in awe of what's happening, no doubt. But yeah, you get a kazoo, harmonica, jingle bells. They got more of the talking directly to the fans. Thanks for buying our records. You got the great line where I think it's Paul says, "I don't know where we'd be without our fans," and John says, "In the army, probably." Um, they make reference to since the old days of Love Me Do. Paul does, which is kind of funny because that was 2 years ago at that point. And of course, John's line about his new book coming out, that it's be the usual rubbish, but it won't cost you that much. George's line about the movie Hard Day's Night and talking about our next movie, which would be Help, of course, and saying this time it's gonna be in color. Always got a grin out of that line. Ringo says it's been a funny year, and someone, I guess Paul or John, goes, and that's kind of funny. So anyway, 65, they're of course huge, gigantic, world famous. The records become a little more produced than just them standing around talking and singing and cutting up, and you get some takes on Yesterday, and you get a funny part where they sing just a snippet of It's the Same Old Song by the Four Tops, and someone, George or John, says, no, 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 copyright, copyright, stop, stop. And there's one point where they say something about lilacs and old brown shoe, which is kind of funny because, of course, that'd be a George song 3 years later. I don't know if there's any connection there or not. And then you get this strange line by John Lennon about bodies floating in the water and floating in the river in Vietnam. So a little bit of political stuff that he snuck in there, I guess. Good stuff. 1966, again, a little more produced and all. You get Everywhere It's Christmas, which is a good song. Kind of a shame, and the next year, too, that both the songs are great, but it's kind of a shame that they didn't spend a little bit more time and turn those into, fill those out into fuller songs that could have been maybe released as a single commercially. But they're great as they are. They're just kind of a halfway done. So yeah, there's a little more weird stuff, a little more kind of Joycean nonsense and non sequitur and so forth, and cool stuff. 67, Christmas Time Is Here Again, of course, which was the only part of this that was ever commercially released. That was released on the flip side of one of the 45s that was put out during the anthology stuff. Great song. Plenty of jam jars by the Ravelers, a silly song but fun. More kind of nonsense wordplay. You've been elected as independent candidate for Paddington. The band's still together, still into it, and doing this, all four of them in the room and cutting up, and seems like they're having fun. 67 one's really great. Ends with the kind of church organ that's really cool with Lennon sort of mumbling who knows what. Then we get to the 68 and 69 ones, and this is when the band's starting to drift apart. So unfortunately, they don't, on those two, they're not all four together in the studios doing this. They just sort of do their parts, and it was cobbled together. They do their parts independently, and by this point, they're probably thinking they've outgrown these things anyway, maybe. Could be wrong, but I think they're probably a little tired of doing these and just doing them out of obligation, maybe. Even though Paul seems to still be into them, and John to some extent. Happy Christmas, Happy Easter, Happy Autumn, good song. That's could have been filled out to a regular, proper song too. Get a lot of little snippets of White Album cuts, Obla-Di Obla-Da, sped up Helter Skelter. Then you get Yuck and Yono, that's John and Yoko talking about John and Yoko, more so than really anything Christmassy. But it's got some of the Lennon wordplay stuff from In His Own Right and Spaniard in the Works style. They had to resort to the dry cleaners, etc., etc. So it's okay for there. George shows up with Tiny Tim, which could have done without Tiny Tim, and Ringo's. I wrote notes, but I can't really remember Ringo's part from 68. 69's probably the least of the bunch, even though it would have been great to have been, a kid back then and in a fan club and get these records every year, every one of them. But bad thing about 69 is George is in it for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. He just basically says, Happy Christmas, Happy New Year, and he's out of there, thinking he probably didn't want to do it, and Paul probably, browbeat him into it or something, who knows. And Paul has a song, This is to Wish You a Merry Christmas, or This Song's to Wish You a Merry Christmas, which sounds kind of like something on the McCartney album, actually, so that would have been a good song if he would have worked that out a little more. John is it's just him and Yoko interviewing each other about eating cornflakes and whatnot, and it's nothing Christmassy, and it's kind of boring, to be honest. And then Ringo shows up, and he's not on here too much, but he shows up to tout his latest movie, The Magic Christian. So it's just a little ad for his movie more than any type of Christmas wish for the most part. Kind of funny though, because they do have a little bit of singing a Good King Wenceslas, John does, so it kind of goes full circle from the 63 to the 69 one. Anyway, that aside, I like the early ones best, and then the 66 and 67 probably after that. But it's a great album, and it's not your traditional Christmas songs, as if you all probably already knew that, I'm sure. But it's just never Christmas without hearing these things, and so I hope you enjoy it. Hope you have a copy of the album. If you don't, hope you track one down. And have a Merry Christmas, and I'll be back with some more videos sometime soon.